So today we're going to be talking about the Third 30 program that we're launching at Mount Olivet and Annunciation. We originally were thinking about just Mount Olivet, of course, but then COVID hit and everything went online. So now we have the opportunity to kind of open it up to a larger audience naturally. And so we have here today Chris Pomfret, who is who's going to be leading this program along with Kim Baker. And so I guess, Chris, before we get started, if you could just say a little bit about yourself. I know you're retired now and found yourself living in New Orleans, but how'd that happen?
Sure, thanks, Dwayne. Well, originally, as you can tell by the accent, I came from Britain 28 years ago to Dayton, Ohio. I was with the British military, the Royal Air Force, so came for a 3-year assignment and stayed forever. So found a way to legally stay in the country and then worked in the aerospace business for 20-something years and retired 3 years ago. Our daughter lives on Pelican Avenue here in Algiers Point. She's a Katrina implant, and that just suddenly sparked us one day to downsize and move to be nearer our children. Because our son's in Texas, so he's in a neighboring state and much nearer than Ohio.
So I guess if you could say a little bit about the Third 30 and what it is.
Yeah.
And sure.
So I coined this phrase, but it just came to mind one day, that between the age of 60 to 90, an awful lot of stuff happens in our lives. We go from typically being very fit and mobile and can usually do all the things we've always been used to doing. But those 30 years from 60 to 90 is a huge transition. And it made me think of the first 30 of our lives, which was also a huge transition as we grew up. I mean, we just went up like a skyrocket if you look back and think of it. But at the time, it was just what happened. You just went along with this torrent of life that's flowing like down a steep valley. It's you just go with it, and before you know it, you're living life and graduated and got a job. And where did 25, 30 years go? And huge change. Well, maybe I thought the Third 30 was a reverse of that, and we needed to be more cognizant of what was on the road ahead of us between 60 and 90. And the motivation for thinking about what's on the road ahead of us is that if we can prepare ourselves mentally for those events that will inevitably happen at some stage, we'd be in much better shape than if we suddenly ignore it and get taken by surprise. And it's not just us, it's our loved ones too. So I started a whole concept of topics around the Third 30 as to how we might better ourselves as we age to deal with those things and make the best 30 years that it can possibly be.
Yeah, I think a lot of people want to avoid thinking about really different stages of our lives, right? I mean, I'm about to head into my oldest, my first, heading off to college, and it would be easy to just kind of ignore that reality. And I find definitely as a minister that when we kind of deny our realities, it actually makes it so much more difficult. So we think that, it seems so pessimistic to think about some of these things. How you get through it is to be realistic. You have hope, but you're also realistic. And I think that that's what you're talking about, right, in this program, is being realistic.
Absolutely, Dwayne. It's what I try to say is we're going to challenge conventional thinking. The way we've typically thought about it, and you just touched on that, is we need to turn it all around and look at it from the other way. And we all have denial. I mean, denial is mentioned numerous times in the Bible, and it still lives with all us humans on earth. We still have, each of us, some degree of deniability. For some, it's a lot. Others, it's not. But I think we need to be conscious of our level of denial within us and try and do what we can to minimize it. And so one way is to keep thinking about what's going to happen to us as we grow older and figure out how to do the best things instead of. And I think we can get a lot of motivation to do that from if we've watched our parents age and eventually pass away. We can feed off those events and their life and what happened, and bring it into our own lives and say, well, how are we going to address those issues that will come along?
So, moving to just some of the practical, how how's the program work, and is it all
So
depressing information? We're all going to die.
that's right. It, the surprising part of it is typically if you nobody would bring up a conversation about growing older at a cocktail party or at a dinner party and say, oh, let's talk about it. But if you get a church group together and you suddenly find everybody's very keen to talk about it and share their examples. Oh, just like I shared the example of my parents and my mother falling down the stairs. I could share 20 examples of things that happened to them as they grew older. But everybody else has got those kind of stories, and in sharing them, I think it helps people address the reality of what might happen to them, because you can reflect it on yourselves and say, yeah, what would we do if this happened, or how am I going to avoid this happening? And we're kind of learning and developing a better practice from what we've seen before. So what I found was surprisingly easy is a small church group, and I began it at my small church, and it was as small as Mount Olivet in Ohio. Just talking to people there, they all said, yeah, we should get together over lunch or something, and a coffee, and chat about it. So that's what we started doing. And I just found everybody was keen to talk and have a conversation and share their personal experiences or thoughts. And it became therapeutic for people. And I think it also strengthened and emboldened people to find their faith and trust and courage to face up to the things that we've typically been trying to ignore, either consciously or subconsciously. It provided a catalyst for people to start talking about it with their own spouses when they got home from a 3:30 meeting, or with their children, or just with themselves, thinking about those things that might happen. If there's one thing Boomer generation can do is leave that mark on the world as to how to grow older wisely, safely, sensibly, and it has to be spiritually with a lot of faith and trust. And that's what I'm trying to get people to engender within themselves, those things, so that your children and your grandchildren will be proud of us, rather than thinking, why did they leave us all this mess? So I think that's the parting note, and hopefully the motivation for people to come along to our discussion groups in the months ahead and get a lot out of it.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, I hope that folks join us. So the next class, I think, is on Friday, May 22nd, right, at 6:30 p.m.
Yeah.
It's going to be on Zoom.
Yes.
And so we'll have the information below this video, as well as on montolivet.org on the website.
Yeah.
We'll have a section for this as well, where folks can learn more about it. And
Right.
and lastly, folks, right, can join this if they can't, if they sometimes miss or can't. I mean, the more you attend, the more you get out of it, right? But
yeah, but it's not serialized in that if you miss the last one, you're going to be behind. They're kind of self-contained, but they're all interconnected. So none of these things are totally discrete, but they don't depend on each other to talk about them. So I'd urge people to participate whenever they can, and not to give up just because they missed one. It's not like watching a TV series where you miss an episode and feel you don't know what's going on. So, yeah, I would. This is the first time we'll have done it on Zoom. I've done it for several years in physical sit-round little workshops or gatherings in the fellowship halls of churches or at conferences, but first time it'll be on Zoom, so it's an inauguration for us all, and I'm confident it will work as well, maybe even better. We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, looking forward to it. All right, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.